What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the 2 Feet on the Ground Gravity Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Chris. Thank you for choosing to tune in today. Hey, folks, one of my favorite things of this podcast is meeting new people, meeting people I've never met before, and having a podcast gives me a great excuse to sit down and listen to other people's perspectives. Sometimes I agree with them, sometimes I disagree with them, but that's the point of this podcast. Listening to other people helps us identify what our foundations are, even if they're different than others. However, today's a little bit different, folks. Instead of me interviewing someone new, someone I've never met before, someone I just found like on social media or on the news or something like that, today I get to interview an old high school friend of mine. Billy Clark and I played football together through high school. I vividly remember just sitting with him either in the stands at a varsity game when we were younger, sitting in class. Billy was just a funny guy. He's made life fun. And Billy continues to do that. However, when he graduated high school, he decided he wanted some challenges. So he joins the Marine Corps Reserves. He ends up walking on and getting on an NCAA football team. When 9/11 happens, he just feels a calling to do something more. So he ends up instead switching over to the Navy, active duty, becomes a military working dog handler. And it's there as he's performing really at a superior level with him and his dog that he is brought into the Navy Special Warfare teams to go out and do missions, and having his military working dog as an asset to them. Wow. I was just absolutely blown away learning more about Billy than I never knew. And it just gives me, I already respected this man for many reasons, but this gave me a new depth of appreciation and respect for him. But before we get into that, folks, I want to talk about Service Peace Warriors. Service Peace Warriors is a 501c3 nonprofit that's dedicated to our nation's heroes. That's right, the men and women that are returning with war-related PTS or other injuries. Service Peace Warriors has their back. They're raising all the money. They're training up the service animal and the veteran, and they're equipping the veteran with the service animal. It's an absolutely remarkable organization, folks. You got to check them out today. ServicePeaceWarriors.org. Folks, with that, let's get into this interview with Billy Clark. Billy Clark, welcome to the Gravity Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Chris. It's been a long time.
Yes, it has. Too long.
Yeah, extremely.
We have some history growing up together, playing football, hanging out at high school, and we just went our different ways, right, in life.
Most definitely.
So is the truth with most folks. And of course, I've been following you over the last few years, catching up on some of your experiences, but I'm excited to get into that here in a second. Do you mind just introducing yourself to the listeners?
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, my name is William Clark. I go by Billy, as Chris stated. I grew up kind of all over the place, moved to Washington State. I would say probably right around middle school, went to middle school and high school there, played football with Chris all the way through middle school to high school. And then after high school, I joined the Marine Corps Reserves and did that for about 4 years and walked on to Eastern Washington University, where I played football there for about 2 years, being in the reserves as well at that time. And then, September 11th kicked off, and I knew I was going to get activated into the Marine Corps at that time. And I really was not happy with the job I was doing in the Marine Corps. I was what they called at the time. It's changed now. My MOS code is a 2531, which is a field radio operator. And I wasn't content with having that job going into active duty, because I wanted to make sure that I was doing something that I felt like I was going to be making a difference in this war that we were about to get into. So happened to walk out of the Marine Corps recruiters after I tried to switch MOSs to Force Recon. They told me, you have to go back to infantry school, which is 6 months of living in the field and shooting every weapon that the Marine Corps possibly has. And then that Recon would recruit from there. I'd already been through infantry school, so I didn't want to have to go through it again. It didn't make sense to me, but I guess being a reservist is different than being an active duty in that component. So then after that, I walked into the Army's recruiter's office and talked to them about going to Ranger School. Was the same option. I had to go into the Army as an infantryman and then be recruited from there. Again, didn't want to go through infantry school again after already being through it. And the Marine Corps is twice as long as the Army, so I didn't see why I still needed to go through the Armies, right? So then finally went and talked to my father, who my mom and dad were separated by the time I was 5. We lived overseas for a while. He was a Marine during Vietnam, did 3 one-year tours in Vietnam, shot all 3 tours. So 3 Purple Hearts, 3 Bronze Stars. And then didn't really have a lot of comms with him until right around when I was, 18 years old. We talked more frequently and tried to develop that relationship again. So I had leaned on him for advice after 6 years in the Marine Corps in Vietnam. He transferred to the Army and did an additional 24 and retired as a command sergeant major out of Fort Benning in the early to mid 80s. So quite a bit older than my mom. He's about 20 years older than my mom. At the time they got married. But again, we were separated from the age of 5 till roughly 18. But we were starting to build that relationship back again. So I reached out to him for some advice, knowing with 30 years of military, is that he would be able to point me in somewhat of the right direction. So I asked him, and he told me to stay clear of the Army and the Marine Corps, period. He said they absolutely do not know how to take care of their soldiers or Marines. You get the bottom of the barrel in just about every aspect that you can imagine. So he told me to choose, in his mind, between the Air Force and the Navy. So just happened to walk out of the recruiter's office, and there was a Navy recruiter there and said, "Hey, we'll give you $8,000 to join the Navy." And so I walked in there, talked to them. And they said, "What job do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I'd like to get into special operations, but more than anything, I want to work around dogs. Dogs have always been my safe haven from my childhood. I grew up in a very abusive, physically and mentally childhood. Things you'd probably see in like horror movies. We can get into that, later on in the podcast, but." Dogs were always my safe haven. I always had a place with dogs where I could sit and have a conversation with them, and they would just always have that warm spirit that kept me sane and made me feel safe. So part of me has always had to have an animal near me in regards to probably due to that reason. So the Navy recruiter's like, "Well, the only job you can do for us as a dog is literally the only job in all of the military as a military police officer." So I said, "Roger that." So signed up for the Navy as a military police officer. Did not go through basic training, because once you've been through the Marine Corps basic training, you don't have to go through any other branches of services basic training. So I went to TPU, Transferring Personnel Unit, up in Great Lakes, Chicago. That was about a month and a half to 2 months long of learning the Navy way, which is very similar to the Marine Corps way, as obviously the Marine Corps is the Department of the Navy. So the language was the same. There wasn't much difference in the language. So I caught on very quickly. Transferred from Transferring Personnel Unit there in Chicago down to San Antonio, Texas, where I went through. I know Chris is familiar with the area very much so. So went through the Navy's Military Police Academy there. And was told that I wasn't guaranteed to work dogs. And I was kind of in shock, because that's not what obviously the recruiter told me, right? So luckily I had a good senior enlisted advisor as my class instructor. He was a chief who was a prior E7. He was a prior corpsman, had transferred over to the military police side of the house. And he had told me, "Hey, if you get top in this class, you get choice orders." So I studied and did the best that I could. And I placed number 1 in my police academy class. And then after I got first, I said, "Hey, I want to go to dog school," which is right across the street there in Lackland.
Medina.
Again, yep, the 341st controls all military working dogs for all branches of service. So I asked to go there, and they told me, "Well, you're not an E5." So originally, back in the, I would say, 80s, 70s, before they had working dogs, in the Navy, particular as a military police officer, you had to have road experience, right? Kind of like in the civilian sector. You got to do your time in patrols before you can move on to auxiliary jobs, whether that's canine or detectives or a narc officer, whatever that may be, right? So I placed first in my class, and I told them that, and I was not an E5. I was an E3 at the time. And so finally, my instructor, again, the same chief, was a good guy. So he talked to the military working dog program manager direct and said, "Hey, this isn't your normal E3. This guy's a prior Marine. He's came in. He's number one in his class. He's a prime candidate to go to school." And at the time, the program manager approved it. So I was the first E3 in the Navy to go through military working dog school, which was kind of odd because the instructors really didn't seem to know how to handle an E3 because everybody's always been an E5 and above.
How about the
And
exact same way as everyone else? Like that would have made sense, right?
yeah, yeah, it's exactly the NCOs just don't know. They're like, why is there an E3 here? He's not an NCO, right? So went through there, did great in school, finished top dog in block one. There's two blocks in military working dog, your detection side of the house, and then you have your patrol side of the house. So detection side of the house, I was top dog on that side, and close to top dog in block two as well. I think I was number 2 or 3, but that was many years ago, so it might slip my mind. I finished there and finished working dog school and went off to my first duty station. So my first duty station briefly was Sigonella, Sicily, which I never really knew where that was prior to joining the Navy. They told me Sigonella. I'm like, where is Sigonella? And they're like, oh, it's Italy. And I'm like, oh yeah, the boot country that looks like a boot, right? And they're like, no, it's not there. It's on the island that's off the boot. And I said, so it's not Italy? So a lot of confusion for me going on during that time frame. But yeah, I took the orders, and I'll be honest with you, Sicily's beautiful. It's a tropical island, right there on the south tip of Italy, and it's very big in agriculture. There's old pillboxes from World War II that you cannot touch. You'll find ammunition and everything there because it's against the law to touch or modify any of those. It's part of their history. But beautiful, beautiful island. A lot of history in it, like I said. Loved the food. The people were very friendly. Reported to my first duty station there, which was a military police unit, which at the time it was the second biggest MP unit in the Navy, second only to Bahrain. But then shortly after, they downsized that base, and I don't know where it stands now. But so yeah, my first duty station was the second largest military police unit in the Navy has, and I was assigned to the military working dog unit there. And then every year we go through physical inspections, right? Law enforcement physical security inspections, or LEPS inspections, and they call them different things now. But my first year there, I placed number 1 bomb dog in Europe. I had a little chocolate lab. His name was Twain, and me and him got number 1 dog team in Europe for explosives. So after that, I was recommended to screen and be presented to the Naval Special Warfare, the specific tier 1 unit on the East Coast that was starting up a program that they hadn't had in existence since Vietnam, right? So they noticed that there was a strength in having dogs on the battlefield. As always throughout history, there's always been some sort of dog in combat, right? Dogs can find and see and smell things that we're just not capable of doing. So I was flown over to Virginia Beach, had no idea what I was getting into, what was going on. Screened and was told, hey, you're going on deployment to Afghanistan in a week. And I didn't know what to do. I'm like, well, none of my stuff is here. It's all in Italy. They're like, no, we're going to outfit you with gear here. And so I was in shock. I didn't know. I was like, I haven't been deployed before. So I'd only been in the Navy for a little over, maybe a little minimum of under 2 years with schooling and then being at my first duty station. And so screened, and then they liked me a lot, and they sent me to Afghanistan in 2002 for OEF 1. And it was a winter deployment. I remember being very cold, and I was in a lot of different areas of Afghanistan as that specific unit moves to areas that specifically have people and individuals that they're looking for. So very expeditionary unit, obviously. And did that for probably 4 or 5 months, and then was brought back, and then had to decompress for about a week in a hotel room right here in Virginia Beach, pretty much by myself. And then I got flown back to Italy. And then in Italy, I started back in my, back in my military police unit again, and then got contacted by that same unit over on the East Coast again, saying they were bringing in military working dog handlers, the top ones in the Navy, full time, and asked if I was interested in coming back because the guys liked me a lot on deployment and they wanted to see me back. So Told him, yeah, most definitely I'm interested. I had already taken orders to Bahrain, as I mentioned, as the largest military police unit for the Navy, as the head trainer for the military working dog unit there, which kind of worked out. I had to transfer there anyway because that East Coast base unit didn't have the billets assigned yet for working dog handlers. So once they did, they called me back. A close friend and mentor of mine, now retired warrant officer Joe Burpo, he called me back. He was the very first kennel master at that unit and said, "Hey, we have our billets. We're bringing you in." So after 8 months of on board in Italy, I transferred back to that same unit. And in between Bahrain and Italy, I did get sent out for this initial surge into Iraq with the Marine Corps, a Marine Corps unit. I was a Navy handler assigned to a Marine Corps unit on the initial invasion. So that was a 9-month deployment. And then basically, like I said, came back, transferred to Bahrain, and then the East Coast base tier 1 unit called me back. So went there, reported there, did 11 more deployments from there in about 11 years. Spent 11 years there.
Wow.
So I did an additional 2 more to Iraq, 1 to Africa, and one to Africa, and then 8 to Afghanistan. So the majority, 13 total deployments, majority of them all at the tier 1 level, except for 2, well, except for 1 actually, because the first one was still at the tier 1 level. So out of those 13, 12 of them were at an East Coast base unit here in Virginia Beach. But enjoyed it. Like, that was something that I never thought that I would ever get the opportunity or that even existed. I was kind of, even though, my father did 30 years, I didn't grow up with him. So I wasn't very educated in how the military worked. I know my family had a deep tradition in the military, very deep tradition. My mother was one of the first women to be airborne qualified way back when. And then I go to my father, 30 years. My grandfather's a Korean War vet in the Navy and an all-Navy boxer during that time frame. A lot of uncles in the Marine Corps. Marine Corps is mainly where most of my family like to stay. And I think that's why I chose the Marine Corps Reserves at first. But very life-changing and altering experience. Found love when I got there. I met my wife after my first deployment to Iraq there around 2007.
Was she also Navy?
No, she's a civilian here. We actually met on the old school, what was it, MySpace. It's funny to say that now, right?
Gosh, that's a flex.
Yeah. So we met on MySpace and messaged back and forth on there for a couple weeks. And then after that, we, about, I would say 8 months later, we got married. I was getting ready to roll out the door, and I didn't want her and my stepson to be without any kind of medical benefits or anything. Is, God forbid, something happened to me, and the likelihood of something bad happening to me was very high at the command that I was at. So we got married right away, and we've been married ever since, right? So as anything, marriages have ups and downs, but I pride myself in having a lot of resiliency, right? So I think that's where a lot of people not fail, they just don't have the resiliency or the experiences in their past to be able to push through certain things, right? So
what does that look like? I don't want, sorry to interrupt, but
no, you're fine.
this
So
is
resiliency, to me, what would my definition of resiliency be? Basically just like that, having the strength and fortitude to push through very, very difficult times. Whether that's, a wife being home by herself with kids, and I'm gone 11 deployments, which was every year.
Yeah.
So, I was probably gone 80% of my marriage, my first, I don't know, 8 to 10 years that we were married. I was probably gone 80% of the time, because even though we were deployed, when we were home, that workup cycle is very long. So we averaged being away. We would deploy for 4. When I first got there, we deployed for 3 months, home for 6 months, deployed for 3 months, home for 6 months. And there wasn't really downtime. It was back. You had your professional development cycle, then you would be back on like a standby cycle, and then you go right back out the door, right? So, and then we started losing guys, and guys were losing guys to mental health issues and losing guys on the battlefield. And they realized that there need to be something done to the force to help evaluate and expand the width of that, right? So they expanded the unit, made it a little bit bigger, and with that, we had the ability to go 4 months deployed and a year off. But again, that year off, you were gone 200 and I'd say probably 80 days a year out of the 365. So you were still gone, even though that year, that was so the goal was to give guys more downtime, but we really didn't have more downtime because we were still gone on training trips and ruts and all these other things that we had to do for exercises prior to deployment, right? So that's where resiliency kicks in, and having the ability to have to deal with 10 million different things that are getting thrown in your direction, to include bullets, bad guys, fast roping out of little birds and helicopters on top of buildings in the middle of the night. That's a lot of pressure to put on someone who doesn't have, I wouldn't say who hasn't had all of the training. It's kind of like a learn on the fly, especially for us original dog handlers at that unit, being a military police officer assigned to a very elite SEAL team. It was rough at first. No one really knew how to use the dogs or how they were going to utilize, because again, they hadn't had them since Vietnam. Yeah. So it was us kind of earning our place. And for a lot of the guys, if you made it through your first firefight, I won't say a name, but one of them is now one of my closest friends, but he was a big country fed white boy, middle linebacker at Arizona State, big guy, right? So he always would look at me in my first team that I was in, like he just had this disdained hate for me. And I would always in my mind say, what did I do to this giant man that he just hates me? Like, I don't remember, did I say something out of line? Did I do something out of line? But every time he looks at me, it looks like he's just going to rip my head off my body. And he's more than capable of doing that. And he's a big man. But then on our first deployment, we got in a really, really bad firefight. And I think it was in Fallujah. We were in Fallujah with the Marines doing some low vis stuff, and we got into a really big firefight or a tick, whatever you want to call it. And I held my own, I guess, in his eyes. And then afterwards, he walked up to me with a smile on his face when we were in the team room, and he just welcomed me to the team. So maybe for some guys, that's what it took. They wanted to see, did you have the grit? Did you have, because in any special operations, it doesn't matter. You can be the most highly trained Green Beret, Ranger, Army Tier 1 unit, Navy Tier 1 unit, Air Force PJs and CCTs, which are some of the best guys out there. I still have very close friends with a lot of our PJs and controllers. You can be the best in the world, but you don't know how you're going to react until you're in that situation. I mean, I've seen Tier 1 operators get into their first tick and not perform. And those guys were sent away immediately. Nothing bad on them. They just didn't know what to expect. They were great in training, but real life is different than training, right? So when bullets start flying, if you don't have a bit of a fear factor in you, then there's something mentally wrong with you. Then you're probably somewhat of a sociopath. That if combat is very addicting, we know that, right? It's the adrenaline, the rush of hunting another human being. There's nothing comparable to it, right? And I think that's why the brotherhood of the guys that you serve with and gals that you serve with is so tight knit, because that is an experience that person to your left and that person to your right, they're willing to die for you. They're willing to put their plates in front of yours and take that bullet for you, even though you may not like each other. Like in the when you're not in that situation, when you're just hanging out around a campfire, you may not like each other, but they're still going to give their life for you. And that connection, I think, is what kept me at that place so long. That and the guys liked me. They just liked keeping me around. I guess I performed to their standards. Obviously, they kept me there for about 11 years, which is unheard of for a non SEAL to be at that unit for that long, especially in a combat role. It's very unheard of. So my guys took care of me. I tried to take care of them as best as I could, utilizing the dog to find hidden enemy and explosives on patrol, on target, whatever it may be. But yeah, over the years, a lot. I did 300 plus direct action raids, and out of those 300, probably 280 were all legit firefights. So Very minimal times that we go into a target that was considered a dry hole that didn't have anybody, or there was just bad intel or whatever it may be. So
Hey, let's
kind
talk
of
about fear.
go ahead, Chris.
Let's talk about fear, because for a young person, they might have this misconception that when you go into something like that in these type of professions, whether it's law enforcement, military, that that the studs, the people they're looking up to, are never afraid. But you just said that you better be afraid, right? So talk about that. What the word courage is a word that I really resonate with, and I these two words are connected. I feel like together.
Very much so. So I think the meaning of courage is controlled fear, right? So fear is a mechanism that all humans have. You either have the fight or flight. And it's not bad if you're flight. It's not. That's just the way that God created you. That's just the way your genetic disposition is. Which just some people don't know until that first round clacks off or whizzes by their head that, hey, this is not for me, right? So if you're not afraid when another human being is shooting at you, like I said before, and this is my personal opinion, then you are a bit of a sociopath. Now, there is something called controlled fear, like I mentioned earlier, and me and you discussed with courage. I think they go hand in hand, right? Controlled fear is to be able to have, I won't say tunnel vision, because you need to know, the what's on your left and what's on your right, your peripherals. You need to know all that 360 of what's going on around you, but at the same time, you know that you need to eliminate the threat as fast as possible. So, and as quickly as you can eliminate that threat, the safer those around you, whether they're civilians or your teammates, are going to be. And that's really the end goal, is to bring everybody home, and not in a body bag, right? So, you still have to have the gump to move. What we always say is move towards the sound of gunfire, right? A lot of people, and you see it in a lot of these, I don't want to say, because I'm not an armchair quarterback, but I'll use Valde shooting incident, right? You had all those cops sitting in the hallway, and who knows, their chief of police may have told them, you will not enter. I mean, I don't know the full spectrum of that operation, right? But from someone, from a 10,000-foot view, looking back and hearing what's put out in the media, and again, the media, you have to take bits and pieces and form your own reality, because there's so much misinformation out there nowadays that it's difficult to actually know what's going on if it doesn't have a political agenda tied to it. So I think that in a situation like that, those cops were probably afraid, and rightfully so. You have a gunman in there who's shooting a bunch of kids. But at some point, in my opinion, again, that your genetic disposition, right? So, and the reason I'll always refer back to genetic disposition is because that's what I know, right? So, and I know a lot on animal psychology, being a dog trainer for 20 plus years, because teaching dogs to do things that we are teaching them to do, you have to understand the gray matter, the two things in between their ears. You got to understand their brain, how it works, what they're thinking. So I've utilized that tool to the best of my ability in humans as well. So I think it all boils down to with or without direction, right? Those police officers could have acted, and probably a lot of them had a difficult time not acting, even if their chief of police told them, you will absolutely not go in there until we get, SWAT or whoever is going to go in there, right? I can tell you from my perspective, there's not a single person in that building who would have held me back from going in there. Now, am I bad mouthing those police officers? Absolutely not. I was not in their shoes. I don't know what was put out, what's going through their head, but the sounds of kids screaming and gunfire to me is so much that I would not be able to take it. I would have to get in there and make an end resolution in some fashion. But again, that's where that controlled fear has to come in, right? So you have this, I think, as humans, as operators, as police officers, sometimes we get tunnel vision on the threat, and that can be good, but it can also be very bad, because then you're losing threats coming from other areas of your peripheral, right? So, but eliminating the threat, if that's not your initial feeling, and your initial feeling is that flight, then you're probably in the wrong job. So, yes. Most police officers, most special operators have that intuition to help others. That's just their nature as humans, is to be helpful to other people, whether they're children, women, men, always someone who's more about others than themselves. And you're going to have bad apples. You're going to have guys that are all about themselves and all about their special operations tab or trident or whatever it may be. And a close friend and mentor of mine, a Medal of Honor recipient, told me this one time, and it sticks to my brain. Who's someone who is not a SEAL, attached to a special operations unit for that long. It meant the world to me that this gentleman gave me one of his tridents when I retired. And he told me, he was like, Billy, don't let anybody tell you you're not a team guy. You're more of a team guy than 90% of the guys I know. And he said the word team guy is a very fickle word. And I asked him what he meant by that. Like, 'cause I understand fickle. I know what he's meaning, but he was like, a lot of guys nowadays, specifically in special operations, not all of them, right? And it's not all of them. It's a small percentage, are only in it for themselves. So, and sometimes you have police officers that are the same way. They're only in it for the glory, right? They want to be this, sheriff that's the bad sheriff of town coming in to handle business or whatever it may be. But hearing that from a senior leader and a Medal of Honor recipient and a very close and dear friend and mentor of mine, it changes your perspective on things. I didn't think about it till after I left, but it changed my perspective, made me think about all of the different incidents and all of the other special operators and people that I worked with throughout my career. And it gave me a different mindset in regards to what I thought about some of them, right? So, but again, I think that all goes back to, I kind of always get off the subject a little bit, but I think it all goes back to that courage, right? Courage is something that I think God gives you. You either have it or you don't when you're born. I think it's an innate ability that you're already born somewhat within you. Just like I think leadership is the same thing. I think you can teach leadership to an extent, but people are born leaders. They're either born a leader or they're not. You have the innate ability to, when someone is doing something wrong, to step in front of that person and be like, hey, that's not right. You shouldn't be doing that. That's leadership, right? That's something that's God-given. It could be a trait that was given to you by your parents or whatever it may be. But I think that most of us genetically are predispositioned to be leaders and have courage to push through very, very difficult times. And it's more of a mindset than anything, right? So
I think that's uncommon. And this is why I say that. Your reaction to move towards gunfire. This is uncommon. I use the word uncommon because in my profession, especially where I work with some remarkable men and women, they don't think of themselves as being heroes. They don't think of themselves as the work that they do is remarkable because it's what they do every day, right? It's Tuesday. That's Tuesday. I was teaching leadership last month or the month before, and I was describing to the class, hey, you've been promoted now. You're a sergeant. Unless you're the first person on scene at an active shooter, you don't get to go in. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. You have to establish command, and you have to sit there and have the command post going until you've been relieved by higher command. That's your main job now. And so if it's an active shooter and you're the first, second, third person, yeah, it's game time. You get to go in still. Life is great. Yep. But once you're the fourth or fifth on scene, it's now your job to stop and establish command. And one of the students in the class who wasn't a police officer because she was a supervisor in the criminal justice organization here in the state, but not a cop. She goes, I didn't get that. I didn't understand that you guys wanted to go in. I'm like, oh, hell yeah. Like if there's a problem, you want to be part of the solution.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. You want to have the right tool and you want to be one of the folks going in there because you trust yourself. You trust the other people on your team and you know that, hey, we can solve this problem together. And so that word uncommon has been bouncing in my brain for like the last month and a half of, we don't want to sit there and pat ourselves on the back like in an ego way, but you have to recognize that what we do in these first responder professions, firefighters, EMS, police, military, it is uncommon when you're running towards people's crisis and you step into that crisis and you make it better.
I agree 100%. Yeah. And I think you're spot on when you say it's uncommon, right? So sometimes you'll see guys go into that situation, and then others will see that leadership, oh, look, and then they'll come in. They'll wait for someone to make a move. But are you the person that's waiting for someone to make a move, or are you the person that's going to make that move first, right? So, yeah, I think you're spot on with that. It's very uncommon, right? That's why very small percent of the world's population will ever experience tier one level operations. I think it's 0.001% of the world's population will ever experience what tier one operators from the United States experience, and that's to include all of the other special operation units. I'm not downplaying what they do. I've worked hand in hand with every single one of them, Army, Green Berets, but it's at a different level. When you're at tier one, you're handling the nation's hardest problems. And like I said, and you mentioned they're spot on. What's going to be the solution, right? So our I wouldn't say a motto, but a term that we always use was find, fix, finish. And nothing beats speed and violence.
Yes.
That's just how we had to operate at the level that you're operating at that, that high pace, because not only are you going after very, very high value targets who probably have large PSDs around them, suicide bombers, whatever it may be, but you have to go in there knowing that what the solution is. And again, like, you said the same thing earlier, that once you, even in the military, once you reach higher ranks, you're no longer that door kicker. You're not going in. You're not the main point man anymore, right? So you got to step back and get overview of the battlefield and make calls that are right to the chain of command back at the FOB or wherever to get the support that we need, whether it's air support, artillery, whatever it may be, right? So it's so much of a wake-up call when you get to the most elite level and you watch these guys operate in front of you, and it's so silent and it's so smooth. And I always tell people, they're like, how did you fit into that? And I said, I looked at it as a dance, really. Every time we did house runs or anything like that, it literally looks like a dance if you know what you're looking at. And it's kind of feels like a dance. It's very smooth. It's very it's not really aggressive, to be honest with you. It's kind of like a ballet. It's a fine line that you're on with controlled aggression and the ability to make split-second decisions at the same time, right? So, and still controlling your fear, like we mentioned earlier. So you have a lot of different things going through your mind at the time, but at the same time, your mind is focused. You just might not think that it is, but it is. It's focused on what the threat is. The body has no other choice. It's going to do that. It's going to focus on the threat until it's eliminated, right? But for me, that's all it was. I always, for some reason, I don't know how, I just knew where to be able to use the asset that I brought to the battlefield with that dog, whether that was finding a barricaded shooter or finding IEDs on our walk-in or whatever it may be, right? So it's true, but when you get around a group of guys, like you mentioned, the word uncommon, and having that fortitude at the tier one level, the majority, like I said, probably 99% of those guys are all on the same level that you are, right? So that's when you really see a group of men that can really get together in that atmosphere and be able to do the things that they do. There's a reason they're at the tier one levels, because they have that uncommon virtue and that controlled fear and controlled aggression. They're not overthinkers. They know how to make split-second decisions, and they have to go through that to training to even get to that level, right? So, yeah, I think you're right. Understanding that it's uncommon for someone to just run to the sound of gunfire is something that people don't understand. They think that they can do it, but then when you're put in that situation, most of them won't ever do it.
Yeah. Hey, let's get into the human factor. I mean, you talked about, because of your upbringing, some of the trauma that you experienced, and you really developed this resiliency, which is important. However, you're not superhuman. I know you are.
Yeah.
I truly respect you, but I know that you are not a superhero.
Yeah.
This pretend comic person. You're human, and there's a consequence to the things that you saw and did. And I don't know what that consequence is, but I just know for a fact you had to experience it. I experienced it probably most intense when I was a child crime detective. So I was on the SWAT team, right? And that didn't bug me. Now, I wasn't getting in firefights all the time like you. But what did bug me was listening to little Susie and little Johnny stories. That really rocked my world. What was that experience like you? 11 deployments in 11 years? Like, What was it like, and what did you do to mitigate it?
So very fast paced, right? Obviously, you're deploying every year. But you're right. We're all human. There has to be some sort of scarring that comes from that fast paced of a life or that type of childhood, right? I think, and I still speak to psychiatrists every day or once a month. Um, and she's brought it to my attention, and I didn't realize it until she brought it to my attention. And she was like, do you understand that your childhood was probably more traumatic than your military career? I'm like, well, how so? She goes, the things that you tell me about your childhood are things that you see in movies now about kids getting abused and stripped naked and not fed for 24 hours, whatever it may be. Like I lived through some of those things as a child, which is unfortunate. But in the way I look at it, it was that my upbringing made me a stronger person because mentally it was so much harder for people to break me after that because I just couldn't be told you're not going to do this because that's all I heard when I got home. So when I was in sports or when I was in the military, if somebody told me I couldn't do it, it sounds cliche, but I would just take that energy and push it to make sure that I did do it. I mean, I remember people telling me I've never played Division I football. I walked on Division I team and made it as a strong safety, right? So, and then being recruited into the tier one side of the house was another big bonus that I never expected, right? So they saw some trait in me or something in the ability that I had that they're like, hey, he's a good fit. Let's bring him in here and see what he does. So, but again, the scarring, right? So 11 deployments in 11 years and then 2 deployments prior to that. Yeah, a lot of firefights. I've taken a lot of bad guys off the face of this planet. I've seen my dog rip bad guys to pieces. I've seen body parts blown everywhere from close air support, whatever it may be. Right, very. Again, if you're operating the tier 1 level, you're going to see things that most people are not going to see. Right, so. But after a while, as bad as it sounds, it starts to become normal because that's what you experience. I mean, every year for 11 years, 4 months out of that year, that's all I saw and all I did. Right. So, and it became to the point where guys would joke about it at the campfire afterwards or something, or we would just talk about, oh, this was fun. Oh, this was cool. That was cool. So that's not normal. Again, that's completely not normal. So if you're experiencing those kinds of things, then you're already messed up, right? So the majority of us are messed up. We don't want to admit it, but we are because post-traumatic stress can show itself in many, many different capacities. It doesn't have to be night sweats or tremors or nightmares or the things you see in movies. PTSD it comes in so many different forms. Mine was anger, right? So it was I noticed it even myself that over the years it was getting very difficult for me to control my anger. Like if I felt myself at a younger age getting out of control, I could easily wind myself down. And then after more combat, I could not. I could not control it. So that's when I knew, okay, I needed to get help. I wasn't really having the memories. I would have dreams and I would relive combat situations, but again, I wasn't waking up scared. I was waking up like ready to go. Like I felt like I was in the game again and I could jump in there and was fine. I wasn't upset. I wasn't crying, wasn't sweating. I wanted to get back in the fight. And that's a different, it's hard to acknowledge that and know that, hey, your time is up. You've done your time. When it comes to the end of your career, it's time to hand it off to the next generation and let them do, what they're trained to do. Right. But yeah, for sure. You're always going to experience it. And it could, like I said, it could manifest in a million different ways. It just depends on, do you recognize where it's manifesting? What in your life has changed? Is your marriage going down south? Are your kids not happy with you? Are you not sleeping? And if again, no sleep, the brain's not recuperating, then all those other things come into effect, right? So I think we all as first responders in military, especially like for you, with the child things, it was the same for me in combat. I did not mind taking a grown man or woman out that had a gun pointed at me, but to see innocent kids get hit by crossfire and to have to walk up to that innocent kid whose head is split open from a 7.62 round, or to see their parents holding them up in front of them as human shields. It's very hard. That's a very hard pill to swallow, because you only see your kids in those light, and those kids in those countries are innocent. They don't know anything that their parents don't tell them. So you do have kids who will run up to you with grenades or have guns and stuff like that. It was mainly Iraq. Afghanistan, I didn't see many of that. Most of the kids were again, very, very third world country in a lot of these areas in Afghanistan, where they'd be running around in the winter in 2 feet of snow and sandals and their normal wear that they would wear during the day. And you see these poor kids, and you think about what our kids have, and how well off we are as Americans compared to other countries. And sometimes I think a lot of Americans, especially today, take that for granted, and they just don't have the concept of what it's like to live in another country or a third world country, because they were luckily born in the United States, right? So, or somehow migrated to the United States via their family, right? So, and I think that's a big problem that we currently have, and that's why we have so much political division. And I think the world is in a bad place right now, and I don't know what's going to come out the other side. And I'm fearful for it, because I have a son that's in the military now. And, I have a young child, my young daughter, and me and my family. So it's kind of scary from a retired military senior enlisted advisor's perspective to see the way that the world revolves, specifically in the United States. It's just, over the last, since COVID, it's just turned, to me, so poisonous. It's just, and you would think that a pandemic or something like that would bring us together, but kind of like 9/11, right? Remember, I mean, that was, to see the whole country and American flags flying everywhere, and hey, we're going to protect our own. 3,000 plus people were killed, and we're going to protect our own and go to war and fix things. You don't see that anymore. It's more division, 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 and it's sad, right? And they're taking the word of God out of schools, and they're trying to get rid of the national anthem, and all these foundational fundamentals that built this country are slowly disappearing. And it's almost like the government has an agenda, and that's their purpose. And I think that they really do. I think they have some kind of agenda where they want to make us dependent on them. I can say that now that I'm retired. And it's just not, to me personally, it's just not in a good place. And unfortunately, guys like yourself and those police officers on the streets, they can't even do their job anymore. I mean, every time they turn a corner or get out of a car, somebody's got a phone on them recording something, and they have a camera on them. Not that a camera restricts them from doing their job, right? It doesn't. But having all these cameras on people, it makes cops think twice about making certain moves, or even reaching for their gun, which can be a life-threatening decision. And it's just sad to me to see. I've known a lot of police officers throughout my military career, civilian and military, a lot of civilians who we worked with them overseas, not overseas, but stateside for training and stuff like that. And to hear some of the stories that they have to deal with, no matter what their color of skin is, it's just sad. Like I have a lot of respect for police officers these days, because you guys' hands are so tied in so many different ways. For us, it's easy, right? We follow our rules of engagements overseas, and we do way more lax than obviously a police rules of engagements, right? But and even then, towards the end of the war, we were getting handcuffed by political moves, right? So and I think that's why a lot of guys got out towards 2015, 2016. A lot of guys started getting out. They started to see the political atmosphere taking over, and they're like, I'm not dealing with this, right? So, and again, police officers, firefighters, like I sometimes I'm a lead instructor at O2X Human Performance, which I do on the side, right? So great human performance capability for law enforcement, military, all first responders. But they go by the 5 pillars, right? So mental health, nutrition, sleep hygiene, strength conditioning, and I can't remember the 5th one, but the main 5 pillars, right? So, but they teach those. A lot of the police officers and firefighters have never been taught that. Yeah. So when we go up to DC and we're teaching a couple of the fire academies up there, we have firefighters telling us that in certain spots at DC, they're putting out a fire and they got their own people, Americans, shooting at them from buildings, that they have to take cover behind the fire truck until police show up and help secure the site before they can even fight the fire. I mean, that is just unreal that you have your own people shooting at you when you're trying to save people's lives. And it's just, I don't want to get into a rant because I probably have gone off a little bit, but it's just, I don't feel safe in the direction that our country is going. And I'm not going to put that on one person's head because it's not fair. One person doesn't make the decisions, right? Um,
I'm thankful here in the Tri-Cities. I can tell you this. We have a remarkable community that supports us. It during COVID, during protests, during all this stuff, it was hard for me to fill up my gas tank without somebody stopping and shaking my hand. I couldn't go into a coffee shop without someone shaking my hand, right? We had almost on a daily, definitely on a weekly basis, people bringing in baskets and cards. We had parents that wanted to teach their children how to show gratitude towards our first responders, right? Now, that is not the national experience. I talk with cops and firefighters around the country, and I've heard a lot of folks have a very, very different experience. Some of my brothers and sisters in Seattle, right? They were not feeling the support. There was, I would argue that there is still a majority that supports us, but with anything in life, usually when you're good with things, you don't say anything, right? I do the same thing. Like when I have to really be intentional about, hey, when I like something, I need to speak up. I need to speak up and express gratitude, thank people, because they don't hear it otherwise. All they're hearing is the complaints, right? And so I'm just continually thankful. I joke that this is like a secret for first responders in the country. Nobody knows about Eastern Washington, right?
yeah.
And I'm telling you, like it is just, again, it's remarkable, but it's still heavy. It's heavy when you have a national narrative being run that's saying, as a police officer, you're racist, you're sexist, you're all of these other things, and they don't even know me, right? This is just because of the uniform that I have on and the badge that I wear each day. I am those things supposedly, and I saw a number of officers walk away from the profession that were really, really great public servants, but they just couldn't handle it anymore.
Yeah, there's a really good documentary on Netflix. It's a couple years old, but it's called Flint. And it's based in Flint, Michigan, and all of the bad situations that those poor police officers had to deal with, right? That's a police officing or a community that generally has 300 police officers. They're down to like 98. And to see the problems from the police officers' perspectives and hear them talk about it, it really gives you a better understanding of what police officers have to go through. And it is just unfair to ask them to not only police our communities, but on top of that, they have to, like you said, they have to deal with all of the things, being called things they're not, just simply because of the uniform that they're wearing, right? Or being categorized as a racist just because you are a police officer or whatever it may be. That's not fair, because they don't know who you are. They don't know your family life. They don't know if you're a God-fearing man or woman. They have no clue. They're judging you based off of your parents, right? So, and the uniform that you wear. And that's unfortunate, you know what it is. And that's again where I'm kind of to the point where I'm getting sickened by the way a lot of Americans act. They just don't realize the freedoms that the military and first responding community gives them on a daily basis. We give them the right to be able to bitch and moan and say all these things, right? Without, if they want to have things one way and no other way, that's fine. They can move to China and any communist country they want, because that's the way it is. You want dictatorship and want one thing to be, black and white, and that's all there is. Go ahead. You have, by all means, you can go ahead and do that. You had all these Hollywood people, saying they were going to leave the country if certain people were elected, and that certain person or persons was elected. And guess what? They never left. They stayed here anyway. So they're not men and women of their word.
Yeah.
So really, what did they bring to the table? Absolutely nothing. And you have all these athletes and movie stars that have so much money that there's no way they can spend it, and they're not giving it back to the communities or the neighborhoods that they grew up in, or educational benefits for kids of parents who have passed away either in the municipal side of law enforcement or military overseas. There's so many good things that they could be doing like that, or speaking out against certain things, and they choose not to. And I'm not going to hammer them for that, because I don't know their life. Like I just said, they don't know you. I don't know them. I don't know maybe they have paparazzi every 10 seconds outside their window and they can't leave their house, right? I don't know that. And just like they don't know who I am. They could see me walking on the street and absolutely have no clue what I did for 24 years in the military, right? So, yeah, you're right. I think that America needs to get back to its basic fundamentals, God and and family and everything first, right? So I think that's where we need to be back at. And unfortunately, normally it's taken an egregious act for us to get there, and it's no different than in combat or in a firefight as a police officer. A lot of our rules and regulations and SOPs are written in blood for a specific reason, right? So we learn when something tragic happens, and we learned after 9/11. We learned after Pearl Harbor, right? So it takes all these major incidents for us to realize how good we have it as a society, and then to come together for a good cause. But then when we do, it'll only last for a short spectrum before people start saying, "Oh, you're baby killers," or whatever it may be, right? So, and again, it's their God-given human right to say and do what they want. That's why we, yourself and many of our brothers and sisters and myself serve for this country, still continue to serve in a municipal side as well. That's why they have those benefits. They would not have that if it wasn't for these men and women putting their lives on the streets. And I don't think that it's something I don't think, I know that they just don't understand that. And maybe that goes back to education. Maybe they're just not being taught proper and in the school systems. I don't know. But yeah, overall, I mean, I'm extremely fortunate to have, two healthy kids, a beautiful wife that takes care of our home and everything like that. But in essence, I think that the country as a whole, this political division is getting out of control, and I think somehow, in some way, it needs to be fixed. And I'm praying to God it's not going to be in a tragic event like 9/11 or Pearl Harbor, right? So, but yeah, it's just where I think we're at now. But you're right, like going back to PTS, right? So we all have some aspect of it. I have a lot of problems with my memory, not really short term and long term, back and forth. But like any husband, when the wife says something, you're like, "You didn't tell me that." Yeah, I did. I told you like 10 times. You're like, "No, you didn't. I would remember that." And then they pull out the phone recording. I told you, and you're like, "Damn it." So
The way you just said that was Billy from 26 years ago.
yeah,
The voice you took on. I was like, "Oh my gosh,
he's back."
Hey, let me ask something, because you have touched on this already through this podcast. And so I'm going to ask you to maybe be specific. How do you take care of your brain? How do you take care of your body? You've mentioned a few things that you do. You talk to a psychologist once a month, right? What's that recipe look like for you so that you can focus on the greater good, your family, right? Your wife, your kids. What do you do to take care of your brain and your body?
So for me, being a non-SEAL at a special operations unit, specifically a tier 1 unit, my goal was to always outperform physically the guys in front of me, right? So I always wanted to be at their level or better, because you had to. You're an outsider to them when you first get there. You're not a SEAL. You're a dog handler being assigned to a very unique unit, right? But with that being said, that unit understands that it cannot do its job without its enablers. They're very intelligent and they're very senior people at that type of a level of command. They understand what the other teammates bring to the fight, right? And the dogs just happen to be one of the primary things they needed during the last 20 years of engagement, right? But what I always did physically was, for me, even now, with some of the stuff I deal with mentally, running and lifting is still my outlet. I mean, it's always been that way. I'm sure you remember back in high school, we all worked out. I mean, in sports, but me and Bobby were always in the gym, even when we weren't in season.
Yeah.
So that has been, and it probably was back then too, more of a way of dealing with my childhood trauma. I just may not have recognized it back then. That spending time in the gym and sports kept me away from the negativity at home. But even now, to this day, I mean, my wife and my kids will tell you, like, if I'm upset, they'll know that I haven't PT today. Like, they're like, oh, you obviously have not worked out today, right? So I got into running when it started to get really, like, when I started to really understand that I have some sort of PTS. Probably about midway through my tour at that command. So 5 or 6 years in, I realized that, okay, I need to get this under control or I'm not going to be here at this command much longer, right? So I started running, and that I was doing like 2 or 3 miles a day, and then it turned into 5 or 6. Then it turned into 8 to 10 a day, and then by the time I left there, I was doing 10 miles a day and probably 20 or 30 on a Saturday. And then a close friend of mine at the time, I when I left the command, I went down to Jacksonville, Florida, and I was working for a 1-star at the time. And I happened to find a senior chief, which is an E8 in the Navy, a little Filipino guy who was an avid runner. I'd always see him running on base. He always see me and we wave and we chat, but didn't really know each other. Then one day he stopped me. He's like, hey, you should really look into running like ultra marathons. I'm like, well, what's an ultra marathon? I said, I know what a marathon is. He goes, anything over a marathon is considered an ultra marathon. So he asked me to sign up for a 50-mile race with him, which was there in Jacksonville. It's from Jacksonville Beach down to Daytona Beach, which is 100 miles. So we started midway and then finished in Daytona Beach. So I signed up for it, trained with him for maybe 6 months, ran the race, crossed the finish line, and started getting people clapping and yelling. And I'm like, well, what's going on here? I just finished the race. You guys are that happy? They're like, no, you placed third. I'm like, I placed what? And they're like, yeah, you placed third. I was like, this is the first race I've ever run at 50 miles. They're like, well, you got first, or you got third. I mean, and I'm like, what? So yeah, I didn't expect to place, so I had to hurry up and leave to go back to work. So my buddy ended up getting the award for me, which was pretty cool. And then after that, I was hooked on ultra. So I did, some hundreds, some more 50s. I still do marathons every now and then. But I've been blessed with good genetics when it comes to knees and hips, and I've never had any issues. I think that running is the way I handle things, and I think that the big man upstairs understands that, and he gives me the ability to continue to do it. But yeah, being able to take out my aggressions, whether it's running, because like nothing makes me feel better than, well, I wouldn't say nothing, but there's a majority of things that don't make me feel better than running 8 miles. And when I step off that treadmill, it's like everything's gone. It's like my weight has just dropped out of my shoulders, my neck, my head, everything. You just don't realize it until you're done, right? So treadmill or outside or whatever it may be. But yeah, that's for my body, right? So running, lifting weights is still a huge aspect of my life. For my mind, psychologists. I'm starting to get into it slowly again, but I'm starting to read a little bit here and there now on different topics. And I just ordered a book. I just got it. I'm taking it with me on a trip this weekend to read. It's not a very big book, but it's about mind control and understanding how to better control your own mind. And it was written for like professional athletes. Like Russell Wilson's a big component in this book. Tom Brady's a big component of this book. And the guy that wrote it, unfortunately, he passed away at a pretty young age, but he's very, very well known throughout the entire NFL as be able to take these high draft picks who were thrown into, leading a franchise and being this brand new leader and saving the franchise at the age of 22. That's a lot of pressure to put on a 22, 23-year-old kid's shoulder, right? So this guy developed this control of the mind and the ability to basically blur the outside noise and focus on the task. So the book has gotten great reviews. I'm going to read it this weekend. I have it right here.
What's the title?
I just want to put the title out. It's called Getting to Neutral, and it's by a guy named Trevor Mawad. Okay. But it's how to conquer negativity and thrive in a chaotic world, right? So Russell Wilson and Tom Brady speak about him very much in depth on YouTube. You can hear some of the stuff they talk, the most amazing things about him. Like Russell Wilson tells him that's the reason he had such a horrendous year last year. It was the first year he didn't have Trevor training him in the offseason, right? Because he passed away last year. So he goes back to his failures and says, I lost control. I lost control of dealing with a chaotic world. I didn't have my rock there to help me understand what was going on in a new environment, new faces. He just kind of lost it. He didn't really know where he was or what he was doing. So yeah, for me, my mind, is either, I would say, well, running helps my mind too, right? So physical fitness helps my mind, helps me clear my mind because the entire time I'm running, I'm thinking. I don't know that I'm thinking, but I do know it. But I don't process it. I don't feel that I process it as I'm running. I feel like, but I am. My mind is processing it. And then when I step off, that weight that I feel go away is all that information that I had in my opinion, leaving my body. And that's why I think that I feel so good when I step off that treadmill is that I'm almost leaving that stuff behind. So yeah, I mean, most doctors will tell you physical fitness or anything like that is one of the priorities that most guys with PTSD or PTS usually use to control and focus their mind in those aspects. But for me, it still pretty much maintains that.
I love it. I love it. Hey, Billy, if people didn't know you before listening to this, what's the best way for them to connect with you or follow you?
So I'm only on LinkedIn for social media platforms. I'm also the national spokesman for Hunter 7 Foundation, which is a um, uh, cancer nonprofit for active and veterans. They can find me on their website, LinkedIn. I forgot to mention I was diagnosed with late stage 3 cancer in 2017. And the doctors told me that it was my physical health was the main reason that I survived that, right? But it's my physical health and the support I had from my family is the reason I made it through that, right? So I'm going on 5 years clean this year. And that's when you actually go into remission. So that's how I'm connected with Hunter 7. I was actually at the White House at the signing of the PACT Act for veterans due to that nonprofit, Hunter 7 Foundation, being invited to the White House for that. Or they can, so other than LinkedIn and Hunter 7 Foundation, I'm also the executive vice president for a nonprofit for soft combat veterans called Sheepdog Coalition. You can look them up online as well. We have a website where we take veterans and first responders that have PTS as well, and we take them out hunting, fishing all over throughout the United States, and hikes and shooting courses and all kinds of good stuff just to get around group of men and women that are like-minded to be able to kind of talk through some of the issues that we all may have in common. And then go have fun, right? So Sheepdog Coalition is the name of that. It's based out of here in Virginia Beach. But other than that, yeah, it's about the only social media platforms I have.
I love it. Well, for the listeners, take a look down in the show notes. You can find all those. Billy, time is my greatest commodity. I can't make more of this stuff. And you have given me a lot of yours. I appreciate your friendship over the years, brother. Thank you.
You too, Chris. It's good seeing you again. It's been a long time. Like you said, too long.
I like it. All right. Take care, brother.
All right. You too.
Again, folks, I am just blown away, absolutely blown away by the privilege to listen to other folks. Billy is a man that I admire for his faith, for his resilience, for him surviving and thriving through really tough times. People like Billy give me inspiration to continue to take one step forward and to continue the good fight of this life. Hey folks, Jamie and I want to hear from you. There's a few different ways that you can communicate back to us. First and foremost, please follow us on whatever podcast platform you're consuming this on. That will cause the next episode to come up. Also, you can rate and review us. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, there's 5 stars waiting on the main page. We'd really appreciate a 5-star rating. 5 stars, folks, if we've earned it, folks. If we haven't earned 5 stars, keep your stars. Shoot me an email instead at chris@gravityct.com. Let us know how to make it better. Future Marriage Monday topics or guests for me to interview. Folks, we only get to live this life once. Let's go out and take care of the people in our tribe. Take care of each other. God bless.